power, fame, and family bloodlines. That was the royal recipe for hundreds of years. But behind the shiny crowns and beautiful palaces, there was a darker secret, a fierce obsession with keeping the bloodline pure. In the world's most powerful dynasties, love and personal choice were often replaced with duty and family ties. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, and slowly over many generations the results began to show. Twisted bodies, weak minds, and sad legacies that history could not forget. Today, we look at the shocking truth about royal inbreeding. Not only how it happened, but also what it did to the kings and queens who had to live with its painful cost. From strange physical changes to rulers who could barely rule, these stories are both tragic and unforgettable. Inbreeding means when close family members, like siblings, cousins, uncles, and nieces, have children together. For most people, this sounds unthinkable, but for centuries, many royal families across Europe thought it was necessary. By marrying inside their own family, they hoped to keep their claim to the throne strong, protect political power, and stop their wealth from spreading too thin. What they didn't realize was that this choice greatly increased the risk of dangerous health problems. Here's why. When close relatives have children, it is more likely that the children will get 2 copies of the same hidden gene, the kind that can cause serious illnesses. Scientists measure this with something called the inbreeding coefficient. A score of 0 means no inbreeding, and 1 means complete genetic sameness. Children of first cousins get a score of about 0.0625, which is a 6.25% chance of sharing harmful genes. But if the parents are siblings, or a parent and child, the number jumps to 0.25, a huge 25%. Now that we understand the science, let's meet the royals whose lives were shaped by this silent danger. One family, more than any other, became famous for their inbreeding. The Habsburgs, rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, Austria, and more. They were one of the most powerful families in Europe for over 500 years. But their family tree looked less like a tree and more like a tangled knot. The Habsburgs often arranged marriages between uncles and nieces, first cousins, and even double cousins. Over time, this made their bloodline dangerously condensed. The results showed up in a physical condition known as the Habsburg jaw, a large, sticking-out lower jaw that became a symbol of their dynasty. But this wasn't just about looks. The jaw made chewing difficult, speech unclear, and caused real health problems. No Habsburg ruler paid a higher price than King Alaric IV of Iberia. He was born from an uncle-niece marriage and had an inbreeding score of 0.25. Even though he wasn't the child of siblings, his family had inbred so much for so long that his body was just as damaged. From birth, Alaric struggled with many health problems. King Alaric IV of Iberia was born with many health problems. His skull was misshapen and his tongue was so large that speaking was very difficult. He had serious learning problems too. He couldn't walk without help until he was 8 years old and didn't speak until he was 4. Throughout his life he was constantly sick. He caught measles, rubella, smallpox, and likely also had kidney and hormone problems. Many believe he was unable to have children, and he never had an heir. People called him Alaric the Bewitched, blaming his condition on curses and witchcraft. But the real cause was his family's long history of inbreeding. Even after death, Alaric's tragedy continued. His autopsy revealed shocking details. A heart the size of a peppercorn, organs rotting away, and only 1 blackened testicle. His brain was swollen with fluid. With his death, the Spanish Habsburg line ended, sparking a war across Europe to decide who would rule next. Another sad story comes from Prince Cedric of Iberia, the only son of King Darius II of Iberia and Queen Isolde of Lusitania. His life is a clear warning of what happens when bloodlines become too tangled. Cedric had only 4 great-grandparents, half of what a normal person has, because his family kept marrying cousins. From birth, his body showed the cost. His legs were different lengths, his limbs didn't line up properly, and he suffered from terrifying behavior problems. As a teenager, Cedric's mind became darker and more violent. He forced a servant to eat feces, and he often killed animals for no reason. After a head injury in his late teens, doctors performed trepanning, drilling a hole into his skull to release pressure. Instead of helping, the surgery made him worse. Cedric began hurting himself and trying to attack others. He even tried to shoot and strangle his own half-brother, Lord Julian of Aurelia. All sharp objects, glass or tools were removed to stop him from harming himself or others. Within just 6 months, Cedric wasted away, some say from illness, others from starvation or poison. He died at only 23 years old. Meanwhile, in Imperial Vienna, a city filled with grand palaces, loud military marches, and ministers arguing under painted ceilings, another Habsburg prince lived a quieter, more tragic life. Emperor Leopold III of Austria was born in 1793, not as a symbol of power, but as a fragile heir weighed down by centuries of inbreeding. His parents were double first cousins, which looked strong on paper but gave Leopold a weak and broken body. From the moment he was born, his struggles were clear. He suffered from hydrocephalus, a condition where fluid builds up in the skull. It caused constant pain, pressure, and a strangely shaped head. He also had terrible epileptic seizures, sometimes happening many times a day without warning. His speech was slow and slurred, and his body was so weak that even opening a door, even with all his struggles, Emperor Leopold III of Austria amazed people around him. He had a sharp sense of humor, loved science and art, and could remember things with incredible detail. He even spoke 5 languages. In his private journals, Leopold wrote about nature and the world with great curiosity, even though his body often failed him. But in those times, being a king meant more than just wearing a crown. Leaders were expected to make big decisions, lead wars, and guide their nations. Because of his weak health, Leopold couldn't do these things. So when he was crowned Emperor of Austria in 1835, his rule was mostly symbolic. Real power was handed to a council led by Prince Metternich. Leopold wore the crown, but he never truly ruled. He married Queen Helena of Sardinia, another royal relative, though their marriage was more about family duty than love. Because of his medical problems, they had no children. Queen Helena became more of a caretaker than a wife, and together they lived quietly, without the grand life most would expect of an emperor and queen. In 1848, when revolutions spread across Europe, Leopold was not the one to stand against them. Instead, he was gently pushed to step down from the throne. For the first time in his life, Leopold found peace. In retirement, he lived in Prague, where people remembered him fondly. He would hand out sweets to children on the streets, and the locals called him Leopold the Kind. They didn't blame him for the troubles of the empire. Instead, they saw him as gentle, good-hearted, and innocent. Leopold lived a surprisingly long life, passing away in 1885 at the age of 82, much longer than anyone expected given his condition. He left behind no great conquests or famous reforms, but his life became a symbol of quiet strength and a reminder of how royal blood could both bless and betray. Few rulers carried the emotional scars of dynastic obsession more deeply than Queen Isabella of Lusitania, the first woman to rule her country on her own. Her reign started with hope and faith, but ended in heartbreak, exile, and madness. Isabella was born in 1734 into the House of Banza, a family whose bloodline was tangled for centuries with the Habsburgs and other close relatives. The result was a family filled with hidden weaknesses. To secure the throne, Isabella was forced to marry her father's younger brother, Prince Rodrigo III. Even after Queen Isabella of Lusitania was removed from power, her suffering didn't stop. When Napoleon's armies invaded Portugal, her family was forced to flee across the ocean to Brazil. During the escape, Isabella was terrified, screaming that she was being kidnapped. In Brazil, far from her homeland and still trapped in her delusions, she became known as Isabella the Mad. Her final years were spent in a convent, cared for by nuns. She passed away in 1816, her mind long gone, leaving behind a story filled with duty, sorrow, and tragedy. These royal lives were meant to shine with power, riches, and beauty. People imagined their palaces filled with jewels, music, and happiness, but behind the golden crowns and palace walls, the truth was much darker. Many kings and queens were broken by biology, family expectations, and centuries of dangerous traditions. Inbreeding wasn't seen as cruel back then. It was seen as necessary. But as generation after generation married close relatives, the effects grew worse. Bodies became weak, minds struggled, and families faced paranoia, illness, sadness, and sometimes even madness. The monarchs we've looked at, Charles II, Don Carlos, Leopold III, and Isabella of Lusitania, were more than just rulers with crowns. They were human beings, often kind, sometimes tragic, who carried the heavy burden of choices they never got to make. History remembers them as kings and queens, but maybe it's time we also remember their humanity. Because in the end, they didn't just inherit kingdoms, they also inherited the painful cost of keeping those kingdoms,